So Putin also said that he wanted tougher questions from Tucker, and he actually named Julian Assange. Now we're naming Julian Assange because next week is the last chance he really has. And so everybody's been talking about Julian Assange, and the fact that Putin mentioned Julian Assange and not a single one of our leaders have mentioned him really says a lot about who Putin is. And again, I respect Putin for who he is, and I think that Russia is lucky to have a leader that is Russia first. And I don't mean the same thing as America first, because America first and Russia first are two different things, because we are the hegemon. So I take that in a completely different way. For the people of Russia, they've gone through hell since the World War II scenario, into the Maidan, and now into what's happening now, all related to fascism. And so they understand a certain degree of things. And historically, of course, they understand that things don't happen the day before. They happened a long time ago. There are a set of events that have to happen in order for what is happening today to take place. And so that is what Putin was trying to explain in this interview, which I think some of that did go over Tucker's head. I do think sometimes that he was, of course, playing dumb in terms of asking basic questions. But here, let's play a little bit of what Putin said about his interview. We're not going to play all of it because it's a very long. You can watch it on my Twitter. You can also go on Rumble, and I put the link on my Twitter where you can watch it's 26 minutes, I think, the whole thing, or 22 minutes, something like that.
Your interview with Tucker Carlson has already reached 1 billion views. There have been many different positive reactions, but it is clear what the reactions have been like from Western leaders. The British Prime Minister and the German Chancellor called the interview, quote, "a ridiculous and absurd attempt to explain the reasons for the start of the special military operation and justify it with the threat of a NATO attack on Russia." What do you think about such assessments?
First of all, it's good that Western leaders are watching and listening to what I say. If today, for some reason, we are unable to hold direct dialogue, then we should be grateful to Mr. Carlson that we can do so through him as an intermediary. But it's bad that Western leaders cheat and distort what I say. Why? I didn't say anything like that. I did not say that the start of our special military operation in Ukraine is connected to the threat of a NATO attack on Russia. Where is this in my interview? There is a recording. Let them show exactly where I said this. I was talking about something else. The fact that we were constantly deceived in connection with NATO's non-expansion to the east. By the way, this was said primarily by the then NATO Secretary General, and he was a representative of Germany. He said, "not an inch to the east." Then we saw 5 extensions. It was a complete deception. We, of course, were and are concerned about the possibility of Ukraine being drawn into NATO, since this threatens our security. That's what I said. But the immediate trigger was the complete refusal of current Ukrainian authorities to implement the Minsk agreements and end the ongoing attack with numerous casualties on the Donbas republics, the Lugansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic. We did not recognize these republics for 8 years, but they ultimately turned to us, requesting recognition as they faced slim prospects of resolving issues within the framework of the Minsk agreements. We recognized them, then made an agreement with them, known as the Friendship and Mutual Assistance Treaty. We fulfilled our obligations under this agreement in accordance with the UN Charter. As I said, we did not start the war. We are only trying to end it. At the first stage, we tried to...
I was just going to say, this is something he has said before. We didn't start the war. We tried to end it. This is the perspective is that the war had already begun a long time ago. And so they were just trying to help facilitate the ending. This is something that I think people still don't understand, because they say, well, Russia, the same way they say Hamas went in there on October 7th. Russia invaded on, I think, February 24th. So therefore, Russia's guilty. It's this thing like, okay, well, there was a long time brewing as to what they were going to do, because this was a long time conflict. Let's play some of that more. Did you have anything to say, Fam?
No, I wanted to, it's all this conversation, you hit it on the nose, that lacks so much context. lacks history, a knowledge of history. You know, we've been saying this for quite some time. You know, Putin mentioned it. He's like, the only thing he regrets is that he didn't go in sooner, right? He said something to that kind of, to kind of what we were talking about for many years, that the people in Russia were like, what are you doing? Why are you dragging his feet? We even mentioned that Yanukovych was saying, hey, dude, you're going to have to get involved. Don't drag your feet on this. He actually, you know, tried to get some sort of peace agreement with the Minsk Accords. Later on to find out that they were just stalling for time so they can build up military. But this is something we said for quite some time, that his own people were mad that he dragged his feet and he took too long.
Yeah. Let's play the rest.
Do this through peaceful means, with the help of the Minsk agreements. As it turned out later, we were fooled here too, because both the former German Chancellor and the former French President admitted and publicly stated that they had no intention of implementing these agreements. They were simply stalling for time to pump up the Ukrainian regime with additional weapons, which they successfully did. The only thing we can regret is that we did not act earlier, believing that we were dealing with decent people.
Mr. Carlson was already facing criticism before the interview took place. Now he is being blamed for allegedly asking too few tough questions. Allegedly, he was too soft with you, and you were very comfortable with him. What do you think? Did you pressure the American journalist with your authority?
I think that Mr. Carlson of yours is a dangerous person. When I say yours, I mean that he is a representative of your profession, journalism. To be honest, I thought that he would behave aggressively and ask these so-called tough questions. I was not only ready for this, I wanted it, because it would give me an opportunity to respond as sharply, which, in my opinion, would give a certain specificity to our entire conversation. But he chose a different tactic. He tried to interrupt me several times. But surprisingly for a Western journalist, he turned out to be patient and listened to my lengthy monologues, especially those related to history. And he didn't give me a reason to do what I was ready for. So, frankly speaking, I did not fully enjoy this interview. But he strictly followed his plan and he fulfilled his plan. It's not for me to judge how meaningful it was in the end, it's just the viewers, listeners, maybe readers of the received material. They must draw their own conclusion.
Right after this interview,
Can
there
we
were
stop
calls...
really quickly? Okay, so again, Putin is a pretty honest person when he's asked. He's pretty straightforward unless he doesn't want to give like some sort of, you know, security information. And here he did say what I think a lot of us who are here or who have been in the region or who, you know, are familiar with the conflict. He didn't really ask anything that we didn't already know. He really didn't ask anything that was like mind-blowing. The reason it has billions of interviews is because he's the first Western journalist since the start of the you know, special military operation that was able to interview Putin, and because he has a wide platform. But in essence, the interview itself wasn't the best interview I have ever heard in my life. It wasn't like a tit for tat. It wasn't like he was asking like very good questions. It was just people wanted to hear what Putin had to say. And had Tucker asked some more provocative questions that were at a higher level and not as superficial, I think Putin would have been able to show the depth of not only who he is, but who Russia is and the depth of their understanding. And when he tried to do that, going through history, Tucker was confused as to why he was going for so long on a 20-minute spiral about the entire history of Russia, the existence of Russia from before the Russian Empire to through the Soviet Union to what Russia is now. But in order to understand why Russia acted, you kind of have to understand all of that. And that's not a very American way of thinking. It is so a Western way of thinking, especially in the US, we literally want things, you know, right off the bat. And Putin has talked about how Americans aren't not really educated. He's literally said that like not long ago. And so there is that almost it like, okay, I'm going to teach you a few things here because you clearly don't know. And there was a little bit of that. And Tucker didn't really, either he didn't get it or he just didn't respond to it and he just went about his way. So again, it was beneficial to those who needed to see it, who have no idea about anything. But for me and for other journalist, it was like, okay, whatever. Like, you know.
Well, yeah, let me just say this much that and there's some people in the chat right now. We're looking at all the chats, both chats. So we do participate in both chats because they both come up on the StreamYards, just so everybody understands that. But let me just say this much that, you know, and I think Scott Ritter gave some criticisms for Tucker, saying he should have been more aware of the history and understanding what was going on. And then there's a lot of people, you know, there's somebody in the chat right now going, it was an embarrassment. He didn't ask tough questions. He could have done that. You have to be understanding, in my personal opinion, of the United States audience and what's out there. Holy, sorry.
We can't hear you, Pasta.
When you said that Tucker's audience needed to hear that, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
When you said, I think that was the most important thing. It's just like when people make criticisms of TikTok and they say, well, you know, the Chinese have to be controlling it because they really lift up and revere engineers and mathematicians and people who are intelligent in society, while Americans, you know, they show and they highlight, you know, people talking about sex and how they look and all that whatnot. You can't blame Putin or you can't blame Tucker, in my personal opinion, for the intelligence level and the understanding of an American audience. They're lost. Most of them couldn't even find Ukraine on the map. So if it's dumbed down, well, I think a lot has to do with the people who are watching and listening to that, not so much the guy giving the questions. You know what I'm saying? And we understand that. You know, Steve Poikin in Slow News Day and AM Wake Up would use the term white belts, yellow belts, black belts, and stuff. And we would talk about the show like, oh, this show is more for brown and black belts. We were talking about AM Wake Up. Well, when my mom would watch the show, she said so many things went over my head. That doesn't mean that my mom is stupid or anybody else is stupid. It's just that what we've been fed in our society, where our news has been, I'm sorry, but we have a dumbed down society. So if you have to feed them baby food little by little for them to understand, so be it. And that's the way I think that interview went.
Yeah. And again, I think it's frustrating because they're here and they're here. So that's where the disconnect is. And he should have a better interview on a
Fiorella,
more depth.
Let's be honest.
Level.
Putin is capable of giving a black belt interview. There could be somebody who comes in and asks serious questions, but it would go over most people's heads. That's why he had to go
in the
back
United
and
States.
the history.
In the United States, but he couldn't even explain the history. Really, he tried, but I think that went over people's heads. That's what I'm saying. Like, but if we're gonna have an interview with Putin, the other thing is, then you should try to get as much as you can out of it, even if some of it goes over people's heads, and then later people can break it down and analyze it. So that also could have been the approach instead of trying to dumb it down. And I understand dumbing things down. Believe me, when we do this show, we don't dumb things down on this show. When you do news on a more generic level, you have to dumb things down. And this is something I struggle with because you guys are a lot smarter than the vast majority of
Look at the
normies.
mentality, fam.
And you have more knowledge, right? You have more knowledge. You've been watching these type of shows for a long time. And so you have more of an understanding than somebody who watches only mainstream media or just got into Tucker Carlson and only watches that. And they have more knowledge than people who only watch mainstream media in terms of MSNBC, Fox, and all those other ones. So there are different levels of knowledge. But again, when talking to the normies, that interview was still for them like, wow, okay, Putin actually makes sense. He's a little bit, but there are things that Putin was saying that I think went over people's heads because it's just a completely different way of thinking. It's the collectivist versus individualistic approach. We have two completely different ways of being, and Russia is partly Asian and European mixed together. So they have a lot of the Asian way of being. They don't. I talked about this in my analysis. They don't respond to things in the straightforward way we do. And it can be really frustrating, but and once you understand it, you understand why it exists. So
fam, there's a whole duck and cover thing where in school they would, the Tom the Turtle or whatever it is, and they honestly made you believe that if you got under your desk in the event of a nuclear fucking blast, that was going to save you. That is the mentality of what is taught even back when, where our schools even taught more, a higher level of education. In other words, a high school degree back then, about 30, 40 years ago, is equivalent to a college degree today. You know what I'm saying? And that's just the way it is. But that's what we're dealing with. And that's what Tucker is dealing with. And that's all I just wanted to point out.
So the last part I want to talk about this one, because the other one is kind of complicated, but this is when Putin mentions Julian Assange, and we can just play this part because he's asked by this reporter, by the way, who follows him everywhere, that people were urging Tucker Carlson, they were trying to actually go after him. These, the mainstream media outlets, the U.S., he was in danger of being indicted and all of these things. And they said that he might be arrested. And he asked them, do you think, Tucker Carlson could be arrested? And Putin answers by mentioning Julian Assange, which I think was really great that he did that. Because, again, we don't have politicians that mention Julian Assange in the U.S., literally zero. And here's a Russian president talking about him as well, while the U.S. and Tucker himself cried about the Evan guy, right? What's his name? Evan, the guy who was arrested for espionage by Russia. Tucker, as far as I know, unless I must have missed it somewhere, he didn't bring up Julian Assange, but he brought up Evan. That really pissed me off. So let's go ahead and play this, and yeah. Last one.
To sanction Tucker Carlson. And in general, there were talks that he might be arrested. Would that even be possible?
Mr. Assange is imprisoned, and almost no one, but his close ones, remember him. That's it. But it is a feature of social consciousness. The news gets forgotten. At least Assange was accused of giving away state secrets, but it's hard to pin such accusations on Mr. Carlson, because he didn't touch upon any secrets. Nevertheless, probably, everything is possible in today's United States. From Mr. Carlson's point of view, this would be sad. I don't envy him, but it's his choice. He knew what he was getting into. But from the point of view of making people around the world realize what a modern liberal democratic dictatorship is, which is vividly represented by United States' current ruling class, it would probably be a good thing. They would then show their true face.
Okay, so on that, I think that's it from that clip. I just wanted to applaud him for mentioning Assange, but he also said something really important, what the United States is, and he differentiated, right? For Tucker Carlson, it would suck if he was arrested, but it would actually show the true face of what the United States is. And he knows what the United States is. He called it a dictatorship, for crying out loud. He called it a dictatorship, and we're the ones that call Russia a dictatorship. We call Cuba a dictatorship because they don't switch presidents accordingly to the way we want them to. And so I thought it was interesting that he called the U.S. a dictatorship and in trying to talk about this whole situation, because if Julian Assange, he's still in prison, and I would argue that people do remember him, journalists, people who are activists. He has a lot of support on those terms, but in terms of the media, the mainstream public, they don't know who he is. They have no idea who he is, and I think that him saying like this would expose the way the United States is a very important point to make. And the fact that he called them a dictatorship is also something interesting, considering how we've referred to Russia for a long time. Who's a dictatorship? Fam, do you have anything to say?
My microphone is off. They're doing like some construction here, so I was going off to the room. Yeah, I mean, ditto. I mean, listen, if Julian Assange had a chance to get to Russia, he'd probably get the same treatment as Snowden, and I think that's important. But
and Snowden has vocally criticized Russia multiple times, which to many was insulting, but because he was protected by the Russian government, he was, he got a lot of help from Russia, but yet he chose to speak out and condemn Putin and all that stuff. And he's alive and well. So that the fact that, people say that you can't say anything wrong against Russia and blah, 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 is just entirely false. So.